Welcome to Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni network and connect with each other and help in other areas in career and finance and health. And there's a real issue today with athletes transitioning out of sport. I mean, between financial literacy, mental health, and we look to make a difference. Now, each week, normally what we do is we interview former college and professional athletes, kind of talk about their journey and their transition out of sport, ultimately to successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. Today, we're kind of flipping the script a little bit, kind of excited by it because we know that we're looking to help out athletes and find ways once they're done with sport. And careers are super important. And so excited today to have Robert Haar. How you doing, Robert?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So Robert, known him for a while, great guy. And Robert is a certified franchise consultant. And his company, Best Franchise Options, is a great company that works with different franchise companies. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But his background, he started out in the restaurant business, owned some businesses, kind of got on the other side into the corporate world, but ultimately got back into entrepreneurship and running his company today. Robert, I'd like talk about your background. I mean, kind of take me through your journey of starting out, owning, getting into that corporate environment, and then ultimately coming back into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me. It's been a long time coming. Been trying to have this conversation for a while, but I'm happy to be here today. So yeah, as you said, I kind of reverse engineered my career, so to speak. I started out right out of college as an entrepreneur, owned and operated, founded my own restaurants, ran those for a number of years, sold and got out, and then went into corporate America, worked for a number of restaurant chains that are all franchising in nature. And I did everything from operations to marketing, building teams, and ultimately spent the last 12 years before doing this as the vice president of franchise development for a restaurant brand. And so I helped that brand strategically grow and bring new franchisees into the system. Now I'm back to being an entrepreneur and owner and operator of Best Franchise Options, a certified franchise consultant, helping those that are looking to transition out of corporate life, or in this case, we're talking about athletes today, to transition into a business model that is really built to take the risk out of business ownership.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's so important. I mean, when athletes, when their time is done, they're like, what do I do next with my life? And, we've had on the podcast, we've had several different we had Major League Baseball player, NFL player, college football player that all talked about how they got into franchising. I think it's definitely a viable opportunity for these athletes to get into. Maybe talk a little about like, what do you think in the athlete's skill set that helps drive being a great franchisee and getting into that business?
Yeah, so first and foremost, athletes, and we'll talk first about team players, right? Athletes that are in a team environment are typically trained to follow the playbook, right? So staying within systems, staying within procedures, doing your job, making sure that the whole is as strong as you're doing as well, right? So the ability to follow those systems, follow those procedures, having a competitive nature, wanting to win. Those are all pretty strong traits when it comes to getting into business ownership. As most business owners might attest to, there is a competitiveness to owning a business, whether they're measuring yourself against yourself or yourself against the others within your organization.
Yeah. Now, would you see a person jump right into franchising, or like an athlete jumping right into, or maybe getting into that operating area that they want to get into first, working with some other people? I mean, what's the best route there?
Well, I think that athletes that are looking to get into a franchise just have to get past the fear of owning their own business, right? I always say the things you want are on the other side of fear in life. And so athletes, whether they believe so or not, that they have the discipline to get into a franchise business. If they've had the discipline to be a professional athlete, especially because that's the highest level, right? You've made sacrifices in order to become a professional at anything. You've made sacrifices. You have the discipline, the competitiveness, and your ability to follow that playbook is there. So now you just have to get in with the right system, the right franchise system that's going to provide you with that support and that guidance. You don't need to have experience in that particular field to be a successful franchise owner, right? You just have to have all the attributes that I just mentioned, and a willingness to learn and follow that playbook is key.
You talk about the playbook and team sports. So it's almost like, would it be a fair comparison to say, in a sense, that like the franchisor, the one that owns all the different franchisees that these franchisees are getting in with, are they almost kind of like the coaching staff per se? And then they're working with the athlete as the franchisee. Would that be a good analogy?
It's a great analogy. In fact, most franchise systems will assign you for the lifetime of your franchise a franchise business coach. They're actually called coaches. They're there to guide you, support you, help you. But think of this. The other thing you have as a franchise in a system is the help, support, and guidance of other franchise owners within that system, right? So you're never alone. Unlike, being an independent operator, an entrepreneur who wants to start their own business from scratch, you don't have all of that same support system in place. It's a very collaborative environment. A franchise system is typically very collaborative in nature.
Yeah, okay, that's great. One thing we talk a lot about is networking, connecting. Talk about that and maybe how that could play into it as well. You've got this athlete that maybe they played 4 years of college, potentially they're fortunate enough to be a professional athlete. Talk about how they can utilize that networking and connecting that they've done while they were playing and parlaying that into a successful franchise.
Yeah, so good franchise owners are mayors of their community, is how I call it, right? So you're out there, you're shaking hands, kissing babies, whatever you need to do. But networking is a key component, because the franchisor is going to give you the marketing playbook, the local store marketing initiatives, and all of that stuff that you need, right? Those playbooks. But you're still going to have to get out there and do what you do best. And you just mentioned it, professional athletes that have been in a collegiate environment. I always think of football when I think of college sports. I don't know why, but there are a lot of players on a college football team, right? So just that ecosystem alone in terms of that networking is incredible. And now with NIL, that's come into play, networking is even.
Yeah, it's interesting. You spurred that thought. You mentioned NIL. Are you seeing any of these franchise companies out there? Any brands specifically getting into NIL, because it's such a big topic. For those who don't know, NIL, name, image, likeness. You've got now all the way down to the high school level, the opportunity for athletes to advertise, sponsor different types of brands. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think the franchisors call them influencers, right?
Yeah.
Those are people that are perhaps in a specific market that they've just activated, that can talk highly, whether it's through one of their social media platforms or at a grand opening. I've seen it all. I've seen that take place. And so when an influencer has the kind of following that they typically have, and they're a recognizable sports figure within a community, you're going to get a lot of exposure.
Yeah. So, it's there was one kind of along that same topic. One of my former guests played football in college and owns a bunch of different franchises. He got into it, but what he wanted to do was stay in his market. So, went to University of Georgia, wanted to stay in that Athens, Georgia market, which is interesting. I think that's important to note, of being in that particular market where, back to, again, people know who you are. You played, had success at the school, and now all of a sudden you're out and you're owning this business. People might want to go. I guess that kind of would fall in line with what you were just talking about.
Yeah, it's everybody has their comfort level. And when it comes to franchising, you do have a defined market, right? You have a defined territory. Most franchisors define that territory either by zip code or city or county, and it's usually in an area where that franchise owner has a certain affinity for, right? They have a familiarity with that particular market, or perhaps they live in that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. In your experience, have you come across any particular franchisors that might be former athletes that look to build their team of franchisees in that space?
I mean, aside from the big names that everybody knows that are in franchising, like the Shaquille O'Neals of the world, the Magic Johnsons of the world, there aren't many that I see gravitating in my orbit right now. I mean, most of the people that I'm working with are corporate refugees or people that are looking to repurpose their time, people that may be retiring or at that age of thinking about it. I have a couple of candidates like that right now that are not ready to go lay on a beach somewhere, right? And so that's so when an athlete retires, they're pretty young typically, right? I mean, you're talking about someone that's typically in their 30s, right? So there's a lot of runway left, and they've got the capital, but they just don't know how to repurpose, where to invest that capital where they're going to get strong returns.
And then I know that this kind of went back to what I was talking about before. Another one of my guests, he talked about it's kind of interesting related back to the region is that what he looks to do, and he's in this case, he's the franchisor. He is looking to get different athletes around the country and having them open up his franchise locations in those areas. So again, it gets back to the notoriety. So for athletes out there, as you're looking into potentially into franchising, that's something to keep in mind is that if you go back to whether it's as a college athlete, going back to maybe where you played your sport, or even as a professional athlete, having knowing those people in that area and those people knowing you could definitely be beneficial.
I was just going to say that we had a professional athlete. I'm not going to use names, but we had an NFL player that bought into one of our franchises years ago. And even though he lived in another city, he felt the most comfort opening the unit close to where he went to college, right? So he opened it in his college town, which, okay, that made a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, I think if people know who you are, then they'll at least come. I mean, the other guy originally he was talking about where he opened up a franchise, and he was the first franchisee of that particular company, and he opened it in his college market, but people knew him. So when they're advertising and putting things on there, how would kind of spur another question related to, let's say, marketing of your franchise. So when you're marketing your franchise, what are some of the things that the franchisee looks to do in marketing, and maybe tie that back into what we were just talking about?
So marketing initiatives for a specific franchisee that owns a territory, those initiatives are given to them from the franchisor, right?
Okay.
So they already have the structure for the type of marketing that works because they've done it. They've tested it. They know what works and what doesn't work, right? Depending on the type of service, the brand that we're talking about, and the specific franchise opportunity, there are some franchisors that will actually provide the actual marketing. So they'll provide a call center that's open 24 hours a day for incoming inbound calls. So those customers are then booked with the franchise owner, so they don't have to do anything except go to give estimates, for example, for one of the services that the franchise offers, right? So I'm not sure if I answered the question completely, but I don't. My role in all of this is not really working with franchisors any longer. It's no longer working with them on their marketing initiatives. That's up to the franchisee works closely with the marketing coach that they're assigned on what initiatives that they should be working on and how to measure them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the social media, it could be direct mail, radio advertising, but in other words, it's the layout is coming from the franchisor, and then it's implemented by the franchisee in their particular markets.
Right, and they have typically a local marketing plan that they can institute as well, kind of a playbook as well for things that they can pick and choose. But yeah, it's like I said, that's the beauty of getting into a franchise. You're not reinventing the wheel. It's already there. You're just plugging in and using the systems that they already have in place.
Okay. For an athlete looking to do something, okay, so their career is done, what's next? Obviously, franchising is very attractive. When they're looking at getting into it, we're talking about, if you're talking about like high level professional athletes, they might have that financing availability. But what if you're somebody who's coming out of college, you might not necessarily have that, or talk a little about the options of like, hey, I'm interested in getting involved in franchise. How can, what's out there to help them?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of being certified with my association. It provides me with a lot of resources that I give to the candidates I work with. And those resources include some of the things that you just mentioned, and those are funding sources. So I have some very large funding sources that helps my candidates determine how to best leverage their assets for a franchise investment, whether it's an SBA loan or it's leveraging retirement funds or a personal loan, whatever that looks like, or a combination of thereof. Usually I get them into a conversation with one of my funding partners, one of our vendors at FBA, right in the early part of our conversation, so we can really get a true picture of what it is that we should be looking at, right? So I'm no different than a real estate broker, right? So you go to a real estate broker, the first question they're going to ask you is, well, what's your budget, right? What can you afford to get into? How much can you spend? So we need to get to that information pretty quickly too. Otherwise, we're looking for areas that we probably shouldn't be looking in.
Okay. Let's talk about brands. And I mean, obviously, there's so many different brands. There's so many different service industries, product industries. Give some guidance. So, okay, I'm thinking I'm done sports and I'm thinking about being a franchisee, getting into that. What kinds of things should athletes look for, and talk about like some of the resources that you offer to help guide them into what's the best type of business for them?
Yeah, so I take a really holistic approach to working with my candidates, regardless of their background, right? So there are 37 sectors in franchising. I have contracts with 800 different brands within those sectors. And so we need to start eliminating sectors and franchise opportunities pretty quickly after that initial conversation. And the way we do that is it's a resource that I have that's an entrepreneurial assessment. And the entrepreneurial assessment was created by franchisors, for franchisors and franchisees. And it helps to determine, among other things, what the risk tolerance level is of that candidate, what their work competencies are, what their strengths are, and what culture, business organization they're going to be a good fit for, right? And franchisors, like I said, will use that. They'll actually look at that assessment before talking to the candidate to see how they match up with their highest performing franchise owners in their system, to see how they stack up. So it's no different than, think of it as when athletes go to those combines, right? So they're going to be timed in the 40-yard dash. They're going to be, the quarterbacks are going to be judged on foot movement, arm strength. Same thing, right? And the franchise owners or the GMs that are there are taking note of all of their, physical skills. This assessment, I should say, is really meant to understand their mental abilities, right? Their psychographics. And it's really the easiest and most efficient way to get those 800 brands and 37 sectors down to a manageable section. So that's the beginning. And like I said, I get to know my candidates pretty well, not just on a business level. I want to understand more about what makes them tick. I want to understand what family life looks like. I need to make sure that I'm checking as many boxes as I can so that I'm presenting, that I'm educating that person on the right brands. And it takes me 2 to 3 weeks of conversations with these brands before I can even start to show them brands that I think that they should take a look at and get into a conversation with.
Okay. Why would you want to get into franchising? Let's talk about that a little bit. So, you're an athlete, you're coming out of sport, and you've got different options out there, different types of careers. In your opinion, like what would help really set franchising apart to be that opportunity that these athletes should pursue?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, business ownership is not for everyone. And I always, and that's okay. Not everybody can be a business owner. And that's really what it is. Being a franchise owner is being a business owner. It's not something you have to go into it with the right set of expectation. It's not something that anyone can go into and invest whatever the money looks like, 100,000, 200,000, up to a big number. Um, and walk away and look in your mailbox every day for the checks to come in. It's just, that's not how it works. So first and foremost, I would say anybody that's considering, whether it's an athlete or otherwise, anybody that's looking at getting into a business needs to understand that this is business ownership. It comes with its own set of risks. Now, the risk tolerance level is a little lower with a franchise, because now you're getting into a system that has already been proven. You're not reinventing anything. You're just duplicating, right? So first and foremost, that's what I want to kind of get out of the way is hey, are you right for business ownership, right? And if the answer is yes, I've always wanted to own my own business. I don't know what I don't know. I don't know where to start. And so that's the type of conversation I could really latch on to, because now I can use my background, my expertise, and the resources that I have available to me to really help that person find the right fit.
Okay. And when you're looking at building, you're part of a bigger team because you got the franchisor itself. But when you're looking at building your own internal team, so I imagine that you mentioned before Shaq and Magic that they're not in a role of operating their particular franchise location. So maybe talk about that, because I think that might alleviate possibly some concerns that, hey, I like this, I like this industry, but I'm not really a business person or I'm not a marketing person. So maybe talk about that concept of just kind of bringing in a group with you to get into that franchise.
Yeah, a successful franchise system has owners that work on the business, not in the business. If you're out there performing the tasks of that business as an owner, you're doing something wrong. That shouldn't be the case, right? So going back to the assessment again, that'll tell us where your strengths are in terms of your work competencies and values and so forth. So if you need to surround yourself with people, hire people that are going to help support you in running that business, maybe look at one of your weaknesses. Maybe one of your weaknesses is marketing. Maybe that's, so, well, then it would make sense to bring somebody in that's going to help with the marketing or sales part of the business, right? So you are definitely, depending on the franchise, you're going to have a team. You're going to build a team. It typically, especially one that you want to scale and grow, you're going to have a team ultimately, maybe not right off the bat, but you're going to ultimately build a team. And the franchisor is going to help you build that team, to tell you, they'll guide you on who to hire, how to hire, when to hire, if you want to grow.
Okay. Basically, you're owning your own business. And so just like any other traditional business, it's the same thing. I mean, you want to build that team, and you need your accountant, you need your tech person, your marketing person. So I guess that's the way they need to look at it. Now, let's look at, in your experience, and we're going to flip it the other way, is let's talk about, I'm just finishing my career, but I want to develop a concept. Okay. So where I have developed a concept, I've got an idea. Maybe talk a little bit about, becoming a franchisor. In other words, coming up with your own product or service. I mean, do you see much of that?
I've seen it a couple of times over the last year. And by the way, I have a resource that helps people turn their business into a franchise. So it's not cheap to do it. And you really have to have proof of concept. And by proof of concept, I mean, it has to be up and running and operational for a minimum of a couple of years with measurable increases in results, right? Otherwise, you don't have anything to show, right? You're not going to sell anything, right? So this company that I work with will actually help you put together your franchise disclosure documents, your FDDs, help you implement a marketing plan, because now you've got to start finding franchisees, new franchisees, lead generation to find those people. And, for the most part, and now as the business owner, you're no longer running that business, right? Because franchising that business is a completely new business, right? So you've got to make sure you've got people in place that are going to continue to run that business successfully, profitably, before you can pull yourself out and to really run the new business, which is the franchise part.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about the process. So walk me through the process. Is that I just got done playing my sport, looking at different types of businesses, careers. I decided I'm very interested in franchising. So take me through that timeline of when I've got this interest and I start to work with you. Walk me through that whole process.
Yeah, sure. So the entrepreneurial assessment that I mentioned earlier is the first step, right? After our initial conversation, right? And that, like I said, is going to help us narrow the field quite a bit. The second step includes a CQ, a candidate questionnaire, so that I can get to know that candidate better on a deeper level, as well as a category rating. So I'm going to need to understand where you fall in terms of your favorite categories within franchising. Like I said, there's 37 of them, and I'm going to want that candidate to rate them on a scale and tell me which ones he finds the most interesting. And there'll be a brief description for each one of those categories. Once I have that information, so those two steps will typically take a couple of weeks, right? And in tandem to that, I have them in process with one of our funding partners so we can understand where they fall from a financial perspective, what their financial capacity is. And then I take about a week and a half to 2 weeks to start researching the brands that fit the criteria that I learned about that candidate over the prior 2 weeks. So from the CQ, from the assessment, and from our conversations, I pick up on a lot of things during those conversations. I take a lot of notes and I build their profile. And then once I have all that information, I then go into my listings and I start looking for franchise concepts that are going to fit all of the criteria, or at least most of everything. So I'm checking most of their boxes. And then we meet again after those 3.5 weeks, and we get on a Zoom call and I educate that candidate on 6 or 7 brands that I'd like them to take a closer look at. Then they narrow it down to 2 or 3 brands that they'd like to get into conversation with. I make that introduction. Then that discovery process with the brand can take anywhere from a month and a half to 3 or 4 months, because now once they get into process with the brands, they're getting to know the executive team, each department, and then they get on what's called the validation stage, which is an opportunity for them to talk to other franchise owners to validate unit economics, the revenue that can be created, what they think of the franchisor and the support that they're getting. So this isn't, and by the way, nobody during this entire process is pressuring. There's no sales component to this. I become a coach, truly a coach at that point, once my candidate gets into process with the brands, and even before that a bit, especially when they're in process with the brands. I'm a coach, right? I'm making sure that they're getting everything that they're needing to make an informed decision. So I'm an advocate as well. So I'm advocating for the candidate to the franchisor. If the candidate had asked for something from the franchisor and they haven't gotten it, I'm picking up the phone and I'm calling them, because I've already established a relationship with that franchise brand. And during my research phase, I'm also having conversations with all of the brands before I even decide to educate them on it, because I want to tell them about my candidate to really understand if it's a good fit for them. So I do all of that work ahead of time.
Okay, so obviously it's a two-way street. I mean, the franchisor has to like and agree that they want this person to be part of their system. Then on the flip side, of course, the franchisee, in all their due diligence and talking to the ownership and talking to the various owners out there and then talking to the franchisor corporate team, they got to make a decision too. What's in your experience? I mean, I know everything's different, every franchise is different, but what would you say might be an average time frame that somebody might be looking at from time of inception of I want to, get into this industry to when they can actually buy one and open one up? And again, I know if you have to build it, that's a whole different story, but just in general.
Yeah, so on average, and data, that's one of the analytics companies and I look at their data fairly regularly. The average deal takes about 3.3 months. Now, it really depends on the size of the deal as well, right? So I have some deals. I had one just recently that took a year. But the reason for that is because it was a very big deal. It was a master franchise deal. So now this candidate, who by the way played college basketball at Auburn, so he became a master franchisee for a brand, and he now owns 25 territories in Alabama and Mississippi. So you said something a minute ago that I wanted to touch on, and it is a two-way street, right? Franchises are awarded. So somebody can't come into this with the notion that, oh, I just want to buy a franchise. You don't just buy a franchisor, a good franchisor, and I only present good franchises, will vet the candidate to make sure that they're going to be successful, they're a good fit for their system. Because making a mistake from a franchisor makes a mistake and brings the wrong people in, it's going to show on their item 20 of the FDD, franchise disclosure document that I just mentioned. Retention rates. If a brand is not retaining their franchisees, they have to show it for everybody to see. And someone like me knows to look there before I even educate a candidate on that brand.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's a great thing for them to know. Just that, hey, you can't just be like, hey, I'm the star football player, baseball player, and I'm just gonna get this franchise because I want it. So let's talk about getting close to wrapping this up. Is that if you have, so you've gone through this whole due diligence process, you've narrowed it down. What would you typically recommend of how many you might want to look at once you've narrowed it down? So just keeping your options open.
Yeah, so a lot of that depends on, and by the way, you'll get a different answer from the different brokers that you would talk to that question. In my view, there's a sweet spot, right? I don't want to, and it really depends on the candidate itself, themselves. And what I mean by that is that some candidates, franchise candidates, have the not only mental bandwidth, but time bandwidth to get into process with 4 brands. I would never do more than 4 brands at a time. But some don't have the time bandwidth or mental capacity. And I'm not criticizing, I'm not downgrading. Some candidates are thinkers. They really analyze things to the granular level. And that assessment will tell me that. So typically people that are thinkers like that, you really don't want to start piling on a whole bunch of brands on them, because their head's going to start spinning. Kind of like you go to the grocery store to get some cereal and you find yourself on the cereal aisle and your head starts spinning like, oh my gosh, what cereal am I going to get, right? So the right answer is dependent on the candidate, and I don't do less than 2. I want them to look at least 2, so that they can compare and contrast. And sometimes I'll even educate 2 brands that are in the same sector that do very similar business model. And the reason I do that is because now I know that the candidate feels strongly about that sector and about that business model. Now I want them to see if they like the cultural fit better at one brand over another. And you'll get to see the culture of that brand as you get into executive calls with the franchise team.
Okay, great. And so, any closing thoughts, any advice that you'd like to give to our listeners out there on maybe the beauty of franchising and why people should get into it?
Yeah, franchising is a great way for someone to get into business for themselves, but not by themselves. So if those that are considering business ownership, I would highly recommend franchising. Your risk level is much lower than getting into a business on your own, starting your own up from scratch. And I would always recommend, if you use me, great. I'm up for it. I take my job very seriously. This is a big decision that's being pondered. So I treat it with that level of respect. But I would certainly highly recommend using a franchise consultant like me to help you to navigate through all of the options and provide you with the type of resources I've mentioned. And remember, working with me, I don't charge. There's no cost to using my services. I'm only compensated by the franchisor and only when a good match is made. So it behooves me to get to know my candidates really well before I start educating them on specific brands.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's so important to find whatever it is, find that right person to work with, that right mentor to work with. Yeah, obviously, Robert brings a wealth of knowledge. This has been great. How can people find you?
So my email, robert@bestfranchiseoptions.com is the best way to get a hold of me. I welcome those to peruse my LinkedIn profile as well. I've got some pretty nice recommendations in there from candidates I've worked with. And you could also see my background and experience and see that you're in good hands as well. And so really, Robert at Best Franchise Options, be a good place to start.
Okay, that's great. And you can find us at alumnidirect.com, and our show, Athletes and Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey, is on our Alumni Direct YouTube channel, as well as across all the different podcast networks. And each week we talk about, as I mentioned, typically we're talking to former college and professional athletes, but this is so important. The resources are behind it, and just knowing that when you're transitioning out of sport, there's a lot of help out there. And there's a lot of people like Robert that really want to make a difference. So strongly recommend looking into franchising, one of your options. And once again, thank you, Robert. We appreciate the time.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate you having me on.
My pleasure.